My last day was going to be in March of 2021. It was going to be weird because I had been with that company for 8 years. I had spent the majority of my time with all those people. They had seen me go through some rough times, and there was even a large group of them that actually watched my daughter grow up. I had also got to see some of them grow. I saw some of them get married and even have children of their own. All of us had spent so much time, so much of our lives together, and none of it really hit me until those last couple of months. As excited as I was about getting to see Jovi again, I was really sad that I was going to be leaving all of those wonderful people behind. The old man, my grandfather, he made those last 2 months just incredible. We spent more time laughing and enjoying ourselves than we had for quite a few months. He's he made it a point to make me listen to country music because I was going to be moving to Texas. I had better start getting familiar with it. I knew that saying goodbye to him, that was going to be the hardest part. As much as I wanted to be in Texas, I also really didn't want to leave all of these people behind. The closer that my final days in Colorado got, the more intense my emotions felt. I started to put together this giant playlist that represented my whole time in Colorado and leaving Colorado. I primarily made it as a coping tool for myself, but I also needed my parents, who were going to be making the drive with me to help me move. I needed them to hear it. I needed them to know that their son, as fucked in the head and as broken as I had been for so long, had hope. It wasn't a disguise anymore. Every disguise that I ever created for myself to get me through those days, all all set me behind, and they suppressed my ability to have hope. Sure, that first disguise that I created for myself had worked the best in terms of getting me through those younger days, but I often wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't convinced myself that my family would reject me for being different. I feared rejection and being an outcast from such an early age, and honestly, I had zero good reasons for it. I convinced myself of the worst scenario and I fed into it way too often. But by the time that 2021 rolled around, my disguises had all been broken. I came out of 2020 when I had hit those familiar lows, feeling like I was meeting hope for the first time. I saw hope in the faces of those around me, and it gave me that boost of encouragement that I needed. Life was changing, and this time it was changing for the better. I often found myself during that final period of time just crying in my car to and from work. It wasn't sobbing, but there were tears. Time is an oddity. Times when we have big plans, something that we're looking forward to, it feels like it's just this long ways off and it's going to take forever to arrive. And when that big plan finally does arrive, it flies by, and in the blink of an eye, it's over and officially a part of the past. Before I really realized it, my final 2 days arrived. I will never forget those last 2 days. I walked in on the second to last morning, just soaking everything in. I was sad that I had to say goodbye, but I was ready for it. I was days away from seeing Jovi again, and that kind of motivation was intense. I hadn't been that excited, nervous, overjoyed, or hopeful since the day of Jovi's birth. The day, for the most part, was pretty much like any other day. We did our jobs and we got our work done. I had people coming up to me all day asking if I was ready, telling me that it was going to be weird without me being there, and telling me that they were excited for me to be with Jovi again. And the closer to the end of the day that we got, the harder it got to hold back my tears. I knew that my team was going to have like a goodbye party for me. The kind of thing just wasn't a secret. And I knew that it was time when one of my closest friends came up to me while I was working. That time, huh? It sure is. Let's go. She and we walked to the cafeteria. And as we walked through those doors and I saw the people and the setup that they had for me, I had the wind knocked out of me. Everyone. And there was a good number of people in that cafeteria were wearing Batman masks. There were cupcakes and dessert glasses, all Batman themed. And one of my longest and closest friends at work, who was an artist, had painted me this canvas with the bat symbol on it, and it was signed by some of my coworkers. And next to it was this large Batman figure, which was actually my card, and there were signatures everywhere on it. And all I could say was, "This is awesome." My mind was blank. It was as if finally, after 33 years, life was giving me a break and just letting me soak in that moment. I was told to give a speech, and I tried. It was short, and I didn't say everything that I wished I had, but I didn't worry about it at that time. I only really worried about it on the drive home that day. But I stopped because I knew that all those people knew how much they meant to me, and they still mean to me. Now, we were told not to give hugs because even though things were a little more relaxed in the world, the company still didn't want anyone being too close to each other. And we unanimously said, fuck that. And we gave tons of hugs. We ate our cupcakes, we hugged, we laughed, and then we called it a day. I did great holding back those tears, but I will tell you, now I did not make it out of that parking lot before the waterworks kicked in. What a blessing I had to have been connected to so many people that made life just a little bit easier, even when I couldn't see it. I arrived at work for the very last time that next morning, and I had to take some very deep breaths. My day was going to be short, a half day, while everyone else was going to be working their normal shifts. I had an exit interview to do, and then I would go and say my final goodbyes, and that would be it. But my team, and especially the old man, they weren't going to let my last day be just any kind of last day. I walked up to my computer, and he instantly cranked the music. My last day was going to be fun. We weren't going to end my time there on a sad note. We listened to tons of music to dance to and to sing to, and everyone was told to swing by our workstation for quick little dance parties before my exit interview, and people showed up. It was sporadic, but people did it. One of his favorite things to get me to do was sing The Lion Sleeps Tonight, because I would get pretty close to matching that high note in the song, and I would always sing it in a silly way. So he made me sing that song a few times that morning. Yes, it was bittersweet, but at least we got to laugh. I went to my interview, and 15 minutes later, it was officially time to say goodbye. The HR rep asked me how long I thought it would take me to say goodbye to everyone, and I assumed like a half hour, give or take. And she actually laughed at me. She said that it was going to take a lot longer than that because there were so many people expecting to say goodbye. I didn't think it would be that many people. And it was. It was a good couple of hours before I was done. I made the rounds. I'd be saying goodbye to one person and more would gather around just to make sure I didn't forget them. It was intense and uplifting to hear so many people tell me that they were excited for my future and that they were excited for me to be with Jovi again. And the hardest one, and the one that hit the deepest, was when I walked up to the old man, my work grandfather. See, he always left halfway through the day because he was known for showing up at crazy early hours. I walked up to him, knowing that if anyone could make me break at work, it was going to be him. Everyone had gone to lunch at this point, so it was just him and I. And he was all ready to leave for the day, and I had managed to just catch him before he took off. This feels like the old Western movies where the two main characters find themselves at a crossroad. One has to go one way and the other has to go another way. They know that they'll probably never see each other again, but it doesn't change what they mean to each other. He said that to me. That feels pretty accurate, and I'm going to miss the hell out of you. Thank you for everything. He took a quick pause, and with the subtle nod of his head, "You're doing the right thing, you know. Don't forget that. This is the right thing to do. And you don't worry about us or this place." And after a few more short words and an abrupt goodbye to avoid sobbing in front of one another, we hugged and we parted ways. This guy, he became one of the most meaningful human beings I've ever known. We worked together for several years, and I couldn't believe that I was actually saying goodbye to him. But I watched him walk away, and when he turned the corner and he left my line of sight, I had to take several deep breaths because that was one of the hardest things that I've had to do. The team, they came back from lunch, and we said all of our goodbyes. There were so many hugs, so many last second laughs, and yeah, some tears. When it was over, I headed back to the HR office to turn all of my work stuff in, and I walked those halls for what was going to be the last time. And before I walked out of the building, though, I had to stop and just soak in one last look. I stood there for what I'm positive was only a couple seconds. But in those few seconds, I replayed all of the great memories from my 8 years there. And then I left with a smile on my face. And that was it. It was an overwhelming experience saying all those goodbyes because I had shortchanged myself for so many years. It wasn't until that day that I learned that through all those times of convincing myself that I didn't matter, that I was worthless, meant nothing to anyone, I was wrong. People people had been in my corner quietly and subtly supporting me and encouraging me. I mattered. And that was what broke me. I had managed to not cry the whole time that I said goodbye to people, but learning and accepting that truth wrecked me and it fueled me. I felt like a burst of heat happened inside of me, and I drove home to finish the last couple pieces of packing. I had been packed for months. I made it a point that when it was time to load the U-Haul, I would be ready. And I was, more or less. There's always something to be, there always seems to be something. I said my final goodbyes to a few friends that came to see me off, and then I drove to my parents' place. And during a few moments of just quiet between saying goodbye to my coworkers and my friends, I had this urge to write something. I wanted to write something that felt like words of encouragement for myself and for my family. And it turned out to basically be a prayer, but not to God, just a prayer to the future, words to hold on to. I can hear the call, the singing far off in the distance. My instincts call on hope, but my body and my mind remain silent. I have ventured into the coldest of nights, the chilled grasp of pain and isolation holding the back of my neck, directing me where it wants me to go. All I've known is a broken heart, and for too long it has been the weight that I carry. Night after night, day after day, I greet my old dark companion. We sit and we drink, a feast of lies and deceit. I can feel the weight of the broken heart growing, pulling me closer to a fate that I am afraid of. I dream of a time, of a place where my dark companion cannot join. I dream of a place where I can leave this weight behind. But my dreams are nightmares disguised in false hope, and every time that I wake, I see the world I have destroyed. I see a place once full of life, now desolate and abandoned. I see a place haunted by the memories of a life that has long been lost. I dream of leaving this place behind. I can hear the call, the singing far off in the distance. It's a call to hope and adventure. But my dark companion rests its arm on my shoulders as it reminds me of my comfort and fear. This comfort is a lie. I know that soon I will have to decide to answer the call or die in this place of pain. It is a simple choice to some, but it is a choice of change, and I am afraid that that change is almost more than I can bear. This comfort is a lie. I find myself standing at the edge of this place, hearing that call beckoning me. I can see the horizon. What lies beyond frightens me. And I can feel myself taking slow, steady steps towards the call beyond. But with every step, my legs grow weaker, and my broken heart becomes heavier. I can only get so far before I feel myself fall, and the horizon seems just as far from me as it had been before. I can feel my dark companion approaching, whispering into the cold air words of guilt and hate. The world moved on without me, and the worst of it was that I let it happen. I made this emptiness my home, and I sat idly by while the rest of the world passed me by. All I kept for myself were the dreams of better days, dreams of warmth on my face, and dreams of peace in a life worth living. I've lived in this empty hate for so long that a life without it feels like no life at all. And yet, I can still hear the call. Where do I find the strength? Where do I find the courage? How do I decide to leave the only life that I have known? Some might call it faith, and some might call it will. I have no name for it, but I know that it is calling me. There is a change in the breeze, so here I stand, at the edge of the only life that I've known in this world of desolation. My dark companion is standing behind me, whispering the same lies of comfort. But I can hear the call, the singing in the distance. I know that this is where I must decide. This is where I must leave the dreams behind. So once more, I step from the edge. Once more, I step away. One more time, one last time, I can hear the call, the singing in the distance. I can feel my legs growing weaker. I can hear the whispers getting louder. This weight that I carry is as heavy as it has ever been, but I can hear the call and the singing in the distance. So once more, I step away. I can feel the rains of change beginning to fall. Soon there will be no turning back at all, and the breeze of adventure begins to move at my side. It holds my hand, and it beckons me to follow. So give me strength. Make my feet run faster. Make this burden grow weaker. Give me the compass that I need to find my way. Give me the courage. Show me the adventure so that I can leave this place. Jake and Christy came over the night before we were going to hit the road for dinner. And they aren't friends. Those two are a part of my family and had been the ones who knew me through and through. We were going to continue the podcast just remotely. Our show had been too vital to my survival, and it had brought too much happiness and connection for us to call a day on it. Before they showed up, I ended up writing another goodbye, the ultimate final farewell. I had to say goodbye to my home, to Colorado. I showed it to my family after Jake and Christy showed up. A final word before the curtains close. 33 years. All I have known are those titans to the west, the altitude of the gods, This is where I experienced the greatest joys and the deepest pains. Oh, Colorado, how do I even begin to say goodbye to you? It's a weird thing when you can see the end of a story coming. I've had to be a part of a couple of significant life stories that I had to come to an unexpected conclusion. The first one destroyed me for many years, and I was convinced for so long that I wouldn't be able to grow from it or allow myself to move on from it. But over time, I did. But I didn't do it very well. For many years, I struggled and felt as though I was simply just existing to die. It's a painful way to live when you deny yourself so many of the beauties in this life. To call the last decade a challenge is the ultimate understatement for me. The last decade has been the most difficult to survive. Although I can finally see a light at the end of the tunnel, I still feel as though I am barely making it out of this story. I am broken. I am bleeding out. But I will tell you something. I feel the drive to move forward more than I have ever felt before. Oh, Colorado, you have been the most significant stage for my life story up to this point. You've opened the curtains to so many plot points, so many twists and turns, and it's an odd feeling knowing that these curtains will be closing. I always figured that I would only leave this beautiful state for the random vacations and trips. But to leave it to start a whole new life, a whole new story, honestly, was something I never fully considered. I may have wanted to run from this place for so long, but if I'm being honest with myself, that's all it ever was, running away. I've been walking with one leg in a grave for so long. I've wanted to bury my past and be gone from it, and I've wanted to embrace it because I know that there are so many things to learn from it. But those lessons are things that I don't think I've been fully prepared to learn. So I have cowered from them. I've avoided them out of complete fear. And now I find myself in the single most ironic twist of my life so far. I have busted my ass to keep my past at a distance, but now I am following the face of it into a whole new story. For so long, I have taken the scenery in Colorado for granted. I've looked at those mountains with resentment, and I've scoffed at their beauty. But I can't deny their beauty, and I can't deny that I will miss the hell out of them. Over the last couple of years, I have felt a stronger connection and respect for the nature around me here in this beautiful state. I have been drawn to be closer to it, to appreciate it, to understand it more. And just when that pull is at its strongest, I am leaving it. I can't help but feel that there is a lesson in that. I can't help but feel that there is something there that I am supposed to take with me as I close this story out and I begin a new one. For as much as I say that this place is a place of death to me, I can't deny all of the life that it has given me. I have been blessed by the people in my life here, and there has been an enrichment that I, like a complete asshole, never fully appreciated until now. These people, this family that have been there for me for it all, are the greatest blessings I never thought I deserved. There is a strength in laughter, and there were lots of it. I could go on and on about all of my regrets, but this story, it can't end with regret. I will miss the laughter and I will miss the connections. I will miss the sporadic hangouts at a brewery and I will miss the conversations. These people have not just been friends to me, they've been the embodiment of grace to me. They have kept their arms open and accepted me, flaws and all. Colorado set the stage for that. Colorado gave that grace a home and it allowed me to live in it. I will always hold this place in my heart. So here it is, a toast to this wonderful place. Colorado has been my home for 33 years. It has been the setting for some of the darkest and destructive moments in my life, but it has also been the setting for some of the most life-altering, beautiful, and wonderful moments. I will miss the nature, the serene calm of the canyons. I will miss the sounds of the rivers echoing off of the rocks, speaking to me to just be in the moment. Thank you, Colorado. Thank you for all of it. As we part ways, I will always carry you with me, whether it's joy of grilling in the snow or an ice-cold microbrew. Cheers to those who have been my grace. Cheers to those to find their own grace. I hope you know that I have nothing short of gratitude and peace for you all. What a journey it has been to see and experience so much in one place. Here's to love. Farewell, Colorado. We ate and we enjoyed ourselves that night. And when I hugged Jake and Christy before they left, I felt this calm come over me. Those two can have that effect. It's pretty incredible. And even though I felt at peace, I couldn't really sleep that night. I was too excited to see Jovi in less than 2 days. And I was also looking forward to the long-awaited release of Zack Snyder's Justice League, which I was a little bummed that I wouldn't get to enjoy with my fellow nerdy friends, and I probably wouldn't even get to watch it for a little while since I had kind of bigger things on my plate. But I couldn't sleep, and I figured, why not? It was released, and so I started to watch it. I got about halfway through before my mom and dad woke up and the final preparations began. We got my car loaded onto the towing cart behind the U-Haul, and my uncle came to help us finish loading the last few items into the truck. When I said goodbye to him, he told me that when I saw my little girl again, I made sure to hug her and hold on to her. He didn't say it like I wasn't already planning on it. He said it as an affirmation. Making it to be with Jovi again had been the end goal, and the journey there had been rough. I had earned what was waiting for me in Texas. I needed to remember that. So we got sandwiches from my favorite place, and an hour later, we hit the road. I was officially leaving, and Colorado was officially a part of my past. On March 18th, 2021, my mom and dad got in a U-Haul with me, and we hit the road. Colorado was officially in the past, and Texas was my future. We made the drive in one shot, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. It's exhausting. But we were all so exhausted, but none of us slept. My mom drifted a bit and got the most rest between the three of us, but I knew I wasn't going to sleep because as exhausted as I had a lot of adrenaline pumping through me. I can't say for sure, but I feel like my parents were also staying awake because of high emotions. And we made that long drive south, seeing nothing interesting for so long. And then a little past the middle of the night, we crossed the Texas border, and I honestly can't narrow down my emotions in that quick second to just one. I was flooded with so many all at once. And every mile we made further away from Colorado felt like a new no turning back for me, but none of it felt concrete until we crossed into Texas. That felt like the first real no turning back point for me. We drove around Dallas and I committed to not going there ever again. The traffic was stupid, and when you're driving a U-Haul, towing a car, exhausted, and full of so many emotions, all battling for top spot, driving in a crowded and compacted traffic is a bit of an anxiety trigger. We made it through the insanity, and then a few hours later, we made our way into my new hometown. And on March 19th, I was pulling up to the leasing office of my new apartment, and that was the next very real no turning back point for me. I signed the papers, I made the deposit, and was given my keys. But the apartment wasn't finished getting ready for me, so we went to get breakfast. We ate and just started soaking in the fact that we were actually in Texas. Soaking in the fact that this was going to be my new home. After we ate, we went back to the apartment, and when I opened my door for the first time, that was my next no turning back now. And it was a big one. I honestly had no clue how I was supposed to process everything that was happening at that moment. All I could think about was that I was going to be reunited with my daughter soon, and I needed to unpack that U-Haul. So I unpacked the U-Haul instead of resting. My brother flew into town and he helped me with the last of the heavier items. And then the moment I had been waiting almost a year for arrived when I got that knock at the door. Seeing my daughter again after so much time apart was exhilarating. Hugging her again felt unreal, like a dream. Everything was so surreal. But what truly blew me away was that all of the color in the world became vibrant, extremely fast for me. And I slept very well that night. Not just because I was exhausted, but because for the first time in my life, I felt like I had actually accomplished something. I had made it through the stormy weathers of my past, and there I was, planting my flag on new soil and ready to start a new life. I woke up way before everyone else, and just like I had when my trek down south began, I decided to finish that movie. It hit a very deep, emotional chord inside of me. The themes of the movie can be applied to real life, and I connected to it. It felt poignant to be watching a film about growth, belief, unity, and doing what needs to be done to ensure a better tomorrow. I wanted to cheer at the end of it because of how it made me feel. And also because as a fan of those characters and stories, that movie delivered. Obviously, I wasn't going to though. Everyone was still sleeping. But it felt right to start this new life with that story. I felt like if there were any signs in this life, this was one for me. I didn't do any deep unpacking while my family was with me because I felt like I needed to be by myself to put things where I wanted and really make it my own. But I loved those few days with my family. My daughter went back to her mom's, and then it was my parents and brother's turn to leave. I waited with them for their Uber to arrive outside the leasing office. It was emotional and odd because we all knew that our time together would be minimal from that moment on. They got in the car and drove off, and I walked back to my new home. I opened the door and sat down on the couch in the quiet. This was it. This was the moment for me. In the quiet, looking around at my new place and just soaking in the fact that I was actually living in Texas now. This was the final and most concrete, no turning back now moment. My new life, this clean slate, this new experience had officially begun. I remember waking up that first morning after everyone had gone home. I made a cup of coffee. I sat down on the couch and just stared out the window, listening to the birds outside chirp. It was so quiet, and there was an immediate difference between waking up in Texas as opposed to waking up in Colorado. It was the first time in an exceptionally long time that I felt like I had taken the right steps. Some might say that it was still just the nerves and ultra wishful thinking that I had done the right thing, but it wasn't that. There was a very new and very real feeling of peace that morning. I was here. I wasn't going to be starting my new job for a couple of days still, so to pass the time, I unpacked and I started setting up the new place. I loved putting up all the nerdy artwork that I've accumulated over the years from going to the Denver Pop Culture Con. I love setting up and organizing my insane collection of movies, and I was so excited to set up my recording space for the podcast. Now, it's changed a little bit since I first set it up, but I still loved getting to make that space. I've always been a proud nerd, and I've always loved all of the collectibles and art that I have. I've never viewed these items as just stuff, but more like they are pieces of me that make up who I am. They represent the best parts of my childhood, lessons that I've learned growing up and continue to learn as an adult. They all have very deep meanings to me, and to this day, I will find myself just looking around at my apartment at all of them and just smile. After I decorated and unpacked, the next most important thing needed to happen. I had to find a local coffee place. I didn't just want to be stuck with going to Starbucks. I wanted the local stuff. You can call it the Colorado in me, but finding local coffee, diners, breweries, it's still important to me. And luckily, I found two shops that are just down the road from me. One thing that was taken from us in 2020 was getting to go and sit down at a coffee shop. All dining in these smaller places ended because of the pandemic. I hated losing that because of how important I find these places. I hated losing that atmosphere, that place where you could go and meet up with people, sit down with a book, work on writing, or whatever project. Coffee shops are the perfect environment, and we lost it in 2020. As I was parking my car in the parking lot, I noticed that there were people sitting inside, and my mind was like, what? I went inside, and sure enough, people were having conversations. People were working on their computers, some with headphones and some without. There were people reading. There were people dining in. I instantly got giddy. I walked up to the counter, and when asked what I would like, my response was this: I just moved here from Colorado. I have no clue what's good. You decide for me. And the young woman, she chuckled and asked how sweet I like my coffee, and I told her that I normally drink coffee black, but occasionally I enjoy the specialty kind. She made her suggestion, and I took her up on it. That drink was pretty damn good. I found a seat, sat down, and just absorbed my surrounding. It reminded me of my favorite place from back home. It had the same vibe, and I couldn't believe that I was getting to sit down in a shop and just enjoy my coffee. I loved it. I needed something that would help me meet new people, make new friends. It's weird how, for my whole life, making friends always seemed pretty easy for me. I've never had a hard time with it, but suddenly I found myself in a place where making new friends was a bit stumbly for me. For the first 6-ish months of living in Texas, I felt almost euphoric. The vibe down here was so different. I felt lighter and I felt great. I fell in love with the town that I moved to, and even though the heat here really does get ridiculous, this place is beautiful. My brother and his family came to visit, and I had the time of my life with them. Having them here helped give me a feeling of success, as if it were a bit of confirmation that I was on the right path. I'm not a swimmer and I typically don't find myself in pools, but when they were here, I got in one of the coolest pools that I've ever been to. And it was just another thing to make me feel good about the decision that I was making. Texas is so interesting, especially in the Austin area. There are so many different kinds of people, and they all just meld together. Better, better than the rest of the country thinks, at least for the most part. This place, it functions on a mentality of you do your thing, I'll do mine, and if you don't mess with each other, we'll be all right. Which is awesome, but it comes with a super heavy dose of insecurity. Image is crazy important to so many people down here. It's a pretty great melting pot, but it's never been more obvious to me that everyone is on a mission to prove something to the world around them. All of us are guilty of it, but it's more obvious down here than it was back in Colorado. It was quite the culture shock when I moved down here, and certain phrases and certain words, which have been pretty much cut out of the world's vocabulary, are spoken constantly and by everyone. I got the chance to revisit Colorado for a few days, which was weird and awesome. I loved going back and seeing people again. It had only been 6 months, but I came back feeling odd. I had never been away from my home for that long, and it kind of threw me for a loop. I felt like a stranger in my hometown, and I have never felt that before. I was in for a shock when only after 6 months, I felt kind of chilly in 50-degree weather, and I could feel the altitude change. I drank so much freaking water those days. But when I flew back home to Texas afterwards, I unraveled. My mental health stumbled, and down I went. Suddenly, I found myself realizing just how alone I am and have been. I went from having such awesome groups of friends and incredibly close and invested relationships with people to not. I had moved to Texas to be with my daughter, and the time that we had lost, really felt like it had placed a permanent wedge between us. All of the traditions that we had shared were gone, and I wasn't coping very well with that. Loneliness can be a motherfucker, and it was making itself prominent. I'd be lying if I said that I don't find myself questioning the move. In fact, I seem to question it a fair amount. I have no tribe. I seem to have lost the ability to actually connect with people like I used to. The closeness that I used to have with my daughter is pretty much gone. And it could just be her age, but the fact is, there are times where I wish I had said no to the whole move. I had envisioned the move to be this boost for Sarah and me to highlight our co parenting skills. It was just us. No friends and no family were following us to Texas. Instead, it was really just for her and her husband. I haven't felt like I'm a part of a parenting team and family since we made the move. And because of that, there are times where I can't help but feel like Texas was a mistake. When those times present themselves, I have to try and find something to validate the move, which can be difficult. The euphoria that I once had for Texas has worn off, and now I have to figure out how to make this place work. How do I pick myself up? I'm here. There's no turning back. But this place is kicking my ass because I've learned that the one thing that always kept me going, even on my worst days back in Colorado, it just simply isn't here. And I've been trying to find it, but I'm failing, and that's always a hard pill to swallow. After 1 year in Texas, I had been dealt both sides of the coin. I've had the great and I've had the shitty. They go hand in hand on this journey. But I may have lost connection and I will always long for it. And even though I feel like it's just not here, I have to keep looking. I have to hope that it's there for me. I may feel like my relationship with my daughter is a bit rocky, but I have to follow through. I have to make this work for her sake and for mine. There were some really tough, rough days where I wanted to give up, pack back up, and go back to Colorado. But then I would remind myself that I vowed to always be around for my daughter. And if I tucked and ran, that would only put more strain on our relationship. So I stayed. I've always had people tell me to enjoy the time that I have with my daughter because when she hit her teen years, that time would pretty much be gone. I've spent the majority of her life refuting that idea, but fighting it was pointless. They were right. Between her age and the fact that my time with her is already limited, our time together is pretty low. It sucks. But I knew that it was going to happen. I told people right before making the move that I understood the fact that I was making this massive decision to change and change for her, knowing that as she got older, I would have less time with her. I told everyone that I believed the move was still important and that even if we didn't spend a lot of time together, at least she would know that I was close by if she needed anything. Those were easier words to say and an easier mentality to have than to actually have to live it. One of my biggest fears as a father was losing the connection between my daughter and I. Before the world shut down, she and I were good. When everything shut down, and then after she moved, I dreaded the idea that our connection would be lost. My dread became reality. Something changed in my daughter during our time apart, and it wasn't just her age. Our relationship took a critical hit, and it was a direct result of our time apart. Jovi stopped trying, and I tried to even things out, but ended up overcompensating. That overcompensation seemed to just make Jovi resent me. We have our good days, but the harsh truth is that what we had is lost at the moment, and all I can do is hope that we find it again someday. This clean slate of mine has been filled with a ton of the same from back in Colorado. Towards the beginning of 2022, I started to really face a few things that I have been avoiding thinking about over the years. I found myself in a place where I understood that I needed to really focus and work out a few things. And that is kind of what Texas is starting to represent for me. It's not about a clean slate. Not anymore. And maybe it never was. Texas is a place of opportunity. It's presenting the opportunity to work out some things. It's a place of testing what you've got and how honest you are willing to be with yourself. Going into my second year, I was trying to go into it with a mindset of understanding. I understood that while back in Colorado, I felt like I had a firm grasp on some of the aspects in my life, but down here, I'm learning that I am just like some of the folk down here. Our insecurities really come to light down here because none of us have actually worked on them. Texas is a place of growth, and I'm aiming to grow. It's going to be hard. And I know that I'm still going to have some days where I am filled with regret. I'm not going to lie or pretend like I won't feel that way sometimes. But I'm too old to keep myself in this rut that I always dig for myself, and I miss whatever is out there waiting for me. Texas is interesting, and there's a lot here that I just shake my head about. But there is something different about this place. It's hard to describe, but if there was a place to really get to know and embrace your true self, this may just be it. I still love this place, and every time that I get a coffee from my favorite spot, I'm reminded of that first week here, and I can't help but smile and feel like somehow I'll be okay. Another little sit down with myself was due. The only thing about this one was that I wasn't fully aware that I needed it until I woke up one morning. I was making a cup of coffee and just scrolling through social media. I had been awake for maybe 5 minutes and was already mindlessly scrolling Facebook and Instagram. I had been doing this little morning routine for a long time and had never put any thought to it. But as if I were smacked upside the back of my head, I became aware of the routine. I wasn't contributing anything on the socials, and I started the day off by scrolling past ads, people thrashing one another for their differences and opinions, partying posts, whatever. It just wasn't a healthy way for me to start my day. So I put my phone down and I ignored it for a little while. And that little while turned into 2 hours. And although I still slip up now and again, I have made it a point to ignore my phone for the first couple of hours of the day. I needed something to fill that space, though. It didn't take much to know what I needed to fill the space with. I found this unopened pack of journals that I had bought during the pandemic. I used to love journaling, but I had stepped away from it during some of the most crucial times that I should have been utilizing it. It was time to get back to it. My morning routine evolved from scrolling social media to reading and journaling for the first 2 hours of the day. It, it was when I started journaling again that I understood that I needed a little one on one with myself. I clearly had a lot on my mind that I hadn't paid any attention to, and I had some things that I needed to work on. The main thing was the most difficult for me to accept. My life, although still being created in Texas, was still on hold. Nothing I did was really for me. Before every decision, I thought about how would it affect Sarah and her husband? And I thought about how would it affect Jovi and our relationship? Even when it means that I have to give up more of my time with my daughter for them. The most that I did for myself was go to the movies or put puzzles together. But everything was done with them at the front of my mind. And the harsh reality is that life cannot be lived when you don't live it for yourself. And through journaling, this was a truth that I had a hard time swallowing. I was overwhelmed when I understood that perhaps one of the reasons why life had always been such an uphill battle for myself was because I had never experienced any of it for me. It sounds selfish, and my instinct was to reject this thought. But it was a persistent thought, and the more that I sat with it and meditated on it, the more it made sense to me. It isn't selfish to get your life on a good track, especially when getting your shit together would potentially have a greater and more positive impact on those around you. I laughed at myself because back in therapy, my dog had told me that I needed to get my shit together before I would really be any good to others. And here I was, years down the road, finally understanding it. And the more that I meditated on it, the clearer it became that I had no idea how to even start. What major thing could I do to achieve getting my life on track after all these years and live life for me and let the positives of that do their thing? And I heard that inner voice that we all have. It simply and calmly said, one first down at a time. There was a time in my youth where I would see my mom being overwhelmed with whatever it was that she was going through. She would vent out her frustrations and her stress, and I would tell her that it was okay. I would tell her that life goes on. In those younger days, those more innocent days, I tended to, as my parents would put it, live for the next fun thing to do. It was a lifestyle that I lost traction on and belief in very quickly, but I do remember the times that I embraced it. As a kid, it was important for me, and I had spurts of it through my teen years, but I completely lost it over time. As soon as I heard that voice inside of me, I remembered those youthful days and that youthful mantra of mine. It all clicked. If I was going to finally create a life for myself, I needed to get back to my basics. I needed to relearn the fundamentals, if you will. I meditated on this for quite some time, and the more that I focused on it, the better I felt. And after that, I worked harder on my journaling and meditation. I started challenging myself with small, subtle things just to give myself a little confidence. Much like a quarterback needs after a few bad plays, I understood that there would be some very intimidating challenges ahead. But if I stuck to the plan, stuck to my fundamentals, I would be able to overcome them. I also had the understanding that I would win some, but I would also lose some. What mattered was that I got back on my feet, adjusted my game plan, and continued forward. And there have been some that I have lost that were soul crushing. There are bad days. It's just that simple. Sometimes those bad days can really get their claws in me, and it's hard not to dwell on them. There are times where to combat a bad day, I have to really dig deep internally and just process and focus. Those are typically the times that someone will come up to me at some point and ask if I'm okay. I try not to worry about putting on a performance so much, although since that was a go-to habit of mine for so many years, it's a little tough to fight the urge to do so. But at least I can recognize the habit when it shows up, and I work on not subverting to it. That's progress, and progress will always be a good thing. During the start of my meditating and journaling, I was also doing a lot of reading. And I read Matthew McConaughey's his book Green Lights, and I felt challenged by the ideas and perspectives that he talks about. The challenges felt good, and I quickly found myself thinking about my perspectives and about me in general. One of the biggest challenges that the book presented to me was not worrying so much about who I am, but who I am not. Much of my life has been lived through disguises, and all of them were lies, which has kind of set up a unique precedent for me. I have a lot of resentment for all those years, but they may prove to be useful as I navigate and process this new outlook on life. It is tempting to follow the path of figuring out who I am. It's the norm, the usual path people take. But I don't think that path is best. The easiest for sure, but not the best. I feel driven to follow Mr. McConaughey's suggestion and figure out who I am not. The more I can strip away the fragments of all of my previous disguises, the more revealing and rejuvenating it will be to see and know myself. Stripping away all the fragments is easier said than done, but it is doable. And even on my worst days, I have to keep working at it. It didn't take long for me to start feeling and acting on open and honest challenges. The main one was getting the words out. I guess that's where all this technically started. Through my journaling and the few blogs that I wrote, I held myself to a standard of being open and honest. I can't effectively change things unless I'm honest with myself and with those that are navigating this life next to me. People have told me over the past handful of years that they respect me and they look up to me because of how I approach life and parenthood. I've never felt like I could accept those compliments and that respect. The only credit I've ever really given myself is that I'm a decent father. I work hard to make sure that my daughter has her basic needs covered, and I work hard at making sure that she will always be able to know that I am here and that I love her. But accepting compliments, it seems for the vast majority of people, is difficult, and we tend to feel awkward when hearing them. And this helped trigger another thing that I needed to learn and practice. Grace. I learned that I've never felt as though I could accept any compliments because I've never given myself any grace. I have maliciously blamed, beaten down, and ridiculed myself for an exceptionally long time, but I've never given myself a little bit of grace. It is no wonder that I haven't been able to really enable permanent change in my life because when something goes wrong, I am quick on the trigger of blaming myself. I'm learning. Giving myself a little bit of grace sometimes is a stumbly process, but I'm trying. There have been a few times where I will catch myself starting to combat a compliment, and I have to actually force myself to shut the fuck up and just say a simple thank you, which is so much easier said than done. But it's an important lesson that I am trying to learn. And it really opened the doors that led to other important lessons that have been gathering dust throughout my life. Life lessons rarely come with something easy. The truth is that life lessons are typically joined with something rough. It's not a lesson unless you've experienced it. Life isn't a lecture hall where you take notes. It's hands-on and it's dirty. I made the parental decision when Jovi was younger to be as honest with her as I felt I needed to be. Her mom and I both agreed that since neither of us ever really had the talks with our parents or really talked about mental health in particular with them, that we would change that. We wanted to be open with our daughter. We didn't want to take away her innocence or anything like that, but the goal was to give our daughter the comfortability that she could ask and talk about anything. If she wanted to know something about either one of us, we would tell her. Some details omitted at times. Jovi and I were heading home one day, and we were having this deep conversation. I told her about the stuff that I was working on, the basics that I was trying to get back to. She smiled and told me, I can tell that it's working. Had I not, or had I been standing and not behind the wheel, I would have felt my legs give out. Really? Yeah, I can tell that you're feeling better. Is there a greater confirmation that hard work is paying off than your children being the ones to confirm it? I don't think so. I wanted to cry. Up to that point, I can't remember a compliment that ever struck so true to my heart like that one did. I had a particularly bad day. It had been a minute since I felt so low. And when I felt that drop, I was afraid. Bad habits are easy to revert back to, and I know that I am susceptible to doing that. I didn't want to revert back to those bad habits, though. I had been diligent in trying to create actual change, and I didn't want all of that hard work to go to waste. I sat with the bad day, probably a little longer than I should have, and then I started to write. At first, it was going to be a journal entry, and then it became this blog. And I came to a stop and I just stared at the words that I had written. As I stared at them, my mind created a movie scene around them. And I was suddenly sitting at that table again in the dark room. I was sitting across from myself. The other me looked off. It was me, but it was a darker version. Felt like I was looking into the lifeless eyes of my suicide. It seemed overly proud, as if it were overcompensating, a bully lashing out for its own insecurities. I reread the words in front of me, hearing my bully snickering at me. I was in a low moment, and I was vulnerable. I knew what I had written in this low moment. It was my suicide note. I had never written one before. Writing it must have triggered that bully of mine to think that it had power over me again. But it didn't. And for the first time ever in my life, I knew that it didn't. I let it snicker. I let it think that it had power and control. And I stayed quiet and I reread my note. The dark room that we were in turned on, and memories of my life, like scenes in a movie, played all around us. I have become a firm believer in the principles that sometimes we just need to get the words out. Sometimes we need to give the words a space where they are no longer bottled up, set aside, and ignored, where they can fester and spread like a disease. I had given those words their own space, freeing up space inside my mind and my heart. I knew the reason I had written it, and my bully did not. So I put my fingers to the keyboard and just started to write. The words I put down, the more words that I put down, the more the scene in my head faded. And soon enough, I wasn't in the scene anymore, and I couldn't stop writing. I had to get the words out, and the words just kept coming. Of course, giving the words their own space proved to spark a lot of stuff inside of me that had been dormant for a long time. And it put me deeper into a processing place that I have never been before. There were times where I felt as though it was too much at once, and maybe I should have paced myself a little bit. But it is what it is. And I'm glad that these words finally have their own space. I can't help but think that as soon as we begin making strides on bettering ourselves and our lives, the bad days seem to be a bit extra when they show up. Much like people calling for peace, love, unity for all, but then condemning and preaching hate and sometimes even threatening death to those who have different opinions. It's obnoxious and exhausting. I know that I will stumble on this journey of change. I know that there are days ahead where I will hit some low moments. I know that my frustrations and negativity will get the better of me at times. I know that I will lose some. I know these things because it is the way. Life is dirty. Life is messy. It's a goddamn roller coaster with questionable uprights. It's a river flowing through a canyon. I look ahead, and I'm no longer looking for that big payoff. I'm not looking for a grand design in my life. I look ahead, and I set my next goal. I have to give myself pep talks, find inspiration, find gratitude. I have to practice grace for the strangers around me, and I have to practice grace for myself. Without it, I won't make it far. Every day is another battle, but it's also another chance to change everything. Life isn't about second chances. It's about progress. It's about continuous improvement and education. If we aren't learning from our mistakes and improving our actions, we are setting ourselves up for failure.